Hi everyone, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host Mark Philpott, and on this show I get to speak to people all across the world about their incredible travel experiences. Hello everyone and welcome back to the podcast show. It's great to be with you all again. I'm coming to you today from aboard my sailboat, bobbing up and down on the waters of the Queensland coast in Australia. Yes, it's a unique show. I don't know how many podcasts are done from sailboats around the world. I guess it's an increasing thing these days. But here I am, and I'm pleased to be back with you all. And if you're a first timer to the show, welcome. Great to have you here. And if you are a regular listener, thank you so much for your loyalty. It's always great to have people coming back and letting us know what they think about the podcast show. Well, on the show, I get to speak to amazing people all over the world about their travel experiences, and today is no different. My guest has been a person who's actually been behind and in front of the camera before, as well as microphones. He was a journalist once in the United States of America, but he decided to follow his passion, and his passion was he wanted to be a comedian. So that's what he did, and today we're going to have a chat to him about being a comedian, but also traveling around and doing some pretty exciting stuff that he's doing. Well, it's fantastic to have another guy on the show today who loves his job as much as I do. Greg, it's a very warm welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
How are you today?
I am just fine. It is 7 p.m. in Chicago, where I am based, and it's finally getting warm, and I've been outside, and I don't feel like I've been in quarantine as much. It's one of those days where you're like, yeah, this quarantine thing's not so bad. At least I can step outside and feel the sun on my face, and maybe we can get through this.
Yeah, beautiful. 7 p.m. in Chicago. I'm imagining it's a beautiful time of the day.
It is. It is very nice. Everybody's outside. I hear lawnmowers and all these kind of things going. We're coming up on a 3-day weekend. We're coming up on Memorial Day weekend. But this is what's weird is my wife actually had to remind me, you know, it's Memorial Day weekend this weekend. Again, when you're in quarantine, all these kind of things just kind of spill together. And I said, oh, is it now? Yeah, I guess. So, there's no barbecues or picnics or anything like that. So you kind of have to be reminded. But it's still a 3-day weekend coming up, and I can't wait.
Well, I wish you in advance happy Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.
Now, are you sure they were lawnmowers and not the governor's drones that were flying over here checking out people?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're flying over checking to make sure that people are mowing their lawn at the proper length. I don't know.
Yeah.
He might be spying on me, but I am doing the correct amount of social distancing, so I think I'm okay.
Good man, good man. Now, we're a travel show, and Chicago is one of my favorite cities to leave. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering...
Yeah. you like it that much, huh? What happened?
I always love getting out of O'Hare Airport, and no, I love Chicago. It's a great place.
Thank you.
I'm just, especially the ribs. I love the ribs.
Oh, the best. Yeah.
Ribs are to die for you. But I thought we could spend 60 seconds for you to tell people basically the 3 top tips about Chicago that they may not know. So what would you advise people to either see or do when they come to Chicago?
Okay, first of all, best month to come is September, hands down. Everything's still open. Everybody's outside. It's not stinking hot. And I always say if you want to come to Chicago, September is the time. The weather is, for the most part, always really good. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, if you want to go have pizza, do not ask the concierge. Do not go to the touristy places like Gino's East that everybody goes to. The place you want to go is the Oven Grinder on the near north side. The Chicago Oven Grinder is the best pizza and one of the best kept secrets in Chicago. Wow. I always say that. And number 3, if you're going to come to a Cubs game, you do not want to let anybody know that you're just there. Your reason to come can't be, I just wanted to see Wrigley Field. All right. That can't be the reason. I mean, it could be the reason, but you can't announce that to everybody. You have to at least pretend like you're interested in the game. Because otherwise people like me who do really enjoy watching the Cubs are going to look at you and say, pay attention, get off your phone, stop Instagramming, and at least pay attention to what's going on the field.
Now, we're going to 97 countries around the world today, so I just want to say for all my listeners, baseball, that's the game with the long wooden bat.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
That's right.
Greg's taking it for granted that everyone that's listening today knows what that game is and who the Cubs are. They probably thought you were talking about some bears running around the streets of Chicago.
Yeah, that could be. But here's the other thing, though. We just finished watching this 10-part series on Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. The Last Dance, right. Oh. And if you remember, if you watched the very last episode, they talked about what a global phenomenon he was, how people in African nations and people who really didn't speak any English and knew nothing about America or American sports, and yet somehow knew about Michael Jordan. I sometimes feel like that's on a smaller level. That's what happens when people go see the Chicago Cubs at Wrigley Field. They're just there because they were supposed to show up.
Did you watch Bob Costas on SportsCenter last night?
I did not. Did I miss something good?
Yeah, you did. Go back and watch the rerun. It was brilliant.
Oh, okay.
He laid some stuff out there. As you probably know, he was the NBC commentator during those years. And
right.
He got out there last night and put some stuff out there that, was pretty interesting about Mr. Isaiah Thomas and Michael Jordan. So
okay, I'll have to watch that. Yeah,
have a listen to that one. Now, all my guests get the opportunity, and I'll even offer it to you, Greg, the opportunity to dedicate their show to someone special in their life. So, who would you like to dedicate your podcast show to today?
I am going to dedicate it to my family. I have my wife and 2 daughters, and we have all been stuck in the house together since mid-March, and we're still on speaking terms, and we still like one another. And if I could actually say, one of my daughters, my youngest daughter Amy, is a senior in high school, and I feel she's really the one missing out on a lot of stuff. She's the one who's missed the prom and has missed her graduation. She was supposed to be graduating in 2 days, and pretty much everything that goes with her senior year has been taken away from her, and she's holding up remarkably well. So I guess in addition to, if I could just maybe put her a little bit above the other 2 in terms of dedicating the show, but I love all 3 of them.
Yeah, fantastic. That's beautiful. Have you watched the John Krasinski Some Good News channel?
Some Good News. I've watched a little bit of it. I think it's a great idea. I wish we had more of that kind of stuff, and good for him for doing something like that. I mean, it's interesting because in this quarantine, you see tweets and Instagram posts from celebrities, and they say about how tough it's been and so forth, and then you look behind them and you look in their multi-million-dollar mansion and they're out in their garden with the pool and the waterfall behind them, and you go, wow, you're really suffering. But Krasinski, I like that. I mean, we know that he's got plenty of money, but he's just got a blank wall behind him and like a couple of drawings from kids, and I think it's a great setup, and I admire what he's doing.
Well, I raised that one specifically because he did a great one the other day with graduation for kids around America. And I thought of your daughter when you were telling us that story. So get her to check that one out because it's hilarious and it was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So thought I'd start you off with a fairly easy question today. What star sign are you?
What?
What star sign are you as in zodiac?
Oh, I'm a Libra.
You're a Libra?
Yeah.
That says a lot about you. Did you know that?
What does it say?
Well, you're a social guy, first of all.
Okay,
surprise,
so far so good.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You like the finer things in life?
I think so. I think my wife likes the finer things more than I do. I mean, I think we'll get into some of the places that I've stayed, and I wouldn't exactly call them the finer places in life. But, when you do what I do, I think you do tend, and you do travel, I think you do tend to appreciate that.
And I'll tell you what you do, 65% of that genre are actually Librans. Did you know that?
I did not know.
Yeah, so next time you're on stage, you tap your fellow comedian on the shoulder and say, I bet you're a Libran. Yeah.
65%?
65%.
Wow.
I dive into this stuff. I'm interested.
I can tell, yeah. And I'm September 26th. I think I just barely made the Libra by like 2 or 3 days, didn't I?
Yeah, you do. So, yeah, interesting fact. And because it's a travel show, I also find out, those people that love to travel are predominantly Geminis, Sagittarians, and Capricorns.
Okay.
So they're the most well-traveled people in the world. Let's say that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
What?
So, okay, we've got you labelled now as a Libra, so we can we can move on. And I want to talk about education and your education in particular. And I'd like you to tell us what's the funniest thing that happened to you while you're at Northwestern University.
Wow. Boy, I may have to think about that. Northwestern is probably not known. Actually, I was going to say Northwestern is not known as a funny school, and yet it has produced some of the funniest people out there. Julie Louis-Dreyfus went to Northwestern, and
Really?
Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers went to Northwestern. So, and those are just some of the ones that are currently working today. There's a lot before that. As far as I will tell, oh boy, let me think. The funniest thing that happened to me at Northwestern. I think this is well, I don't know if it's the funniest because it didn't end real well for me, but I mentioned that I mentioned Julie Louis-Dreyfus, and when I was a freshman, the big improv comedy show at Northwestern was called the Meow Show, after the cat's meow. And I tried out for that my freshman year, and the way you tried out in an improv show was they put you into teams of 4, and then you had to create scenes. Well, Julie Louis-Dreyfus was in my team of 4, and we started doing scenes, and I was laughing so hard at her, which is the kiss of death in improv. You're not supposed to laugh. You're supposed to make other people laugh, but you're not supposed to be cracking up. And she was so good and so talented that I could not stop laughing. So at that point, I realized 2 things. Number 1, I was not going to make the Meow Show. And number 2, this girl who was in my group was destined for really big things. And a year later, she was on Saturday Night Live. She left school after her sophomore year, and It took her all of 8 months to land a role on Saturday Night Live. So that's one of the memories that stands out. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of very funny things that happened to me at Northwestern, but that one really stands out.
What were you studying there?
I was a journalism major. I started out as, I always wanted to go into broadcast journalism. I wanted to be a TV reporter. And as a result, I chose a major in the School of Speech called Radio, TV, Film, which sounds like it was right up my alley. Just the name of it. So that's what I started in. And I went to my first class, first week of school, and this was a class all the radio, TV, film majors had to take. And I realized I was completely in the wrong school, because this whole major was geared towards people who wanted to be filmmakers. That's what we were talking about. And I just looked around, and everybody knew exactly what the professor was talking about when he was mentioning all these technical film terms and so forth, and I didn't have a clue. And I said, I got to get out of here. I almost transferred to another university. My second choice was Indiana, and I thought, well, they have a great journalism program too, but I managed to squeeze my way into the journalism program, the Medill School of Journalism, and that's where I learned to write, and that's when I realized this is where I belong. So that was what my degree was in.
Who was the role model? Did you have a role model that led you down that path? Who created the idea in your head that you wanted to go down the path of journalism?
I just always was a news junkie. I was a news junkie as a kid, and I was very fascinated with TV news, with TV anchor people, and just the fact that they every night told people what they wanted to know. And it wasn't necessarily the national. It wasn't like I was hung up on Walter Cronkite. I liked the local journalists. That's who I liked. There was a guy in Chicago named Walter Jacobson, and he used to do the news wearing. He was like one of the first journalists that didn't have a sport coat on. He would deliver the news wearing rolled up shirt sleeves, and it looked like he just showed up on the set at 2 minutes before airtime because he was out covering some big story. And I love this guy. And I love the way his delivery, and he was very hard-nosed, and he gave it right back to the politicians of Chicago. And I thought, this is the guy that I want to be like. So I would say he was my role model. And I never missed the local news. I used to sit in my fraternity at Northwestern, and I'd be the only guy in there in the TV room watching the local news. Now, part of it was I had to, because my journalism professors they always said, you better know what's going on, because I could give you a pop quiz anytime about what's going on in Chicago. So you need to know what's going on locally. So part of it was for class, but I would just sit there all by myself and say, I want to be that guy.
Did you see it also as a potential avenue to travel?
No, never.
No?
I never, it's funny. I never, when I was in college, I never saw myself as someone who necessarily wanted to get into the travel industry. I enjoyed going to new places. I remember my junior year in college, I went to see a friend of mine who had graduated from Northwestern a couple years earlier, and he was living in New York, and I went to see him in New York, and I'd never been to New York City before, and I remember just the whole weekend there, just thinking this is the coolest city I have ever been to, and I couldn't get enough of it. Today, even today, New York remains my favorite place to travel to, at least domestically. Yep. But I never considered myself as someone who wanted to make travel my full-time occupation.
Okay. It's interesting. Nearly everyone that I have on the show and we talk about, New York is potentially their favorite city. It just keeps coming up time and time again. It's a unique place, isn't it?
It is. And I think people either love it or hate it. There's no people who I meet who just say, oh yeah, New York's kind of, yeah, I'd go there. People either can't wait to go or they can't wait to leave, or they go once and they say, I never want to go back. I feel the same about people who go on cruise ships. People either want to go on a cruise like every year, or they go once and they say, well, I'm never doing that again.
It's well, we'll get into that shortly, but it's a very interesting industry right now, the cruise line industry.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about pizzas? Best pizza in New York or in Chicago?
Oh, well, I'm going to say it's kind of like comparing apples and oranges, because they're so different. I mean, you can't, it's two different meals. So I love the Chicago pizza, obviously, but that is a meal. If you want to get a slice of pizza, I will take New York any day, because you can't. That's one thing about Chicago. It's very hard to just walk down the street and walk into some place and come out with a slice of pizza.
Yeah,
they don't have those kind of places.
You've got to sit down and have a meal.
Yeah, exactly. But I love the all the different places in New York, and my favorite is artichoke pizza on. I believe it's on First Avenue and 9th. It's by NYU. They've got several of them. And artichoke pizza, it's weird. It doesn't mean it's made with artichokes. That's just the name of the pizzeria. Because I've said that to people. They're like, I hate artichokes. And I said, well, that doesn't have anything to do with the pizza. I know it's weird. But at NYU, go down and find artichoke pizza and get a slice of margarita pizza, and you will thank me later.
I've never had someone on the show that's got a little black book with pizza shops in it.
I don't, because I always go to that place.
You do
I don't need, as long as I know where that is, I don't need a little black book.
So tell me, if you were blindfolded at a table and someone gave you a piece of Chicago pizza versus New York pizza, would you be able to tell the difference?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yeah? Because
How?
The thickness of it.
Okay.
I would not be able to pick up a piece of Chicago pizza and eat it with my hands. I would have to cut it. I could try, but the weight alone would be enough to tell me this is Chicago, this is New York. You can't fold Chicago pizza, put it that way.
Folks, if you're listening today, I'm going to put all the links to Greg's online sites in the show notes, but I'm also going to put his pizza recommendations there as well. So
that's right. Do not fold Chicago pizza. That would be the only recommendation. So, it'll be your loss, and whatever clothes you're wearing, that'll be the end of those if you try to fold a piece of Chicago deep dish pizza.
So let's get back to Northwestern, and after you graduated, what was the first step after that?
First thing I did, well, let's do the travel thing. I did do, at the time, every kid was going to Europe after graduation. There was no study abroad program when I went to school. You didn't know anybody who did that. If they did, they either really wanted to get away from college, or they had some really strange major that required them to go away. But I didn't know anybody who studied abroad while they were in school. The thing to do, if you had some time and maybe you'd save some money, was before you started your job, before you became an adult, so to speak, you toured Europe for a while. And that's what I did. I went to Europe for 6 weeks. I did the whole backpack, hostel, pension. I did, I believe, about 13 countries in 6 weeks. There was a book, there was a very famous book called Let's Go Europe. It was a whole Let's Go. I don't know if you heard of it. It was almost like the series, Computers for Dummies or Coffee for Dummies. This was called Let's Go, and you could go Let's Go China, Let's Go stuff in the States, but Let's Go Europe. And it basically was a Bible that told you when you're in Europe and you are there on a budget, if you go to this country, here's what you should see. Here's what you should stay. Here's where you should stay. Here's where the currency exchange is. Every American college student who was over in Europe had a copy of Let's Go Europe.
Right.
And
so I went. Your first overseas trip?
It was. And,
so how was that? How was that experience? First
absolutely
time?
Wonderful, and something I could never do. I went with a buddy of mine from Northwestern, and we kept saying to ourselves, we will never be able to experience Europe like this again, ever. And the trains, you could get the Eurail pass, and what was great about it was we would get on these trains, and we would stop in a town that we thought sounded interesting. Again, maybe somebody told us or the book told us that. And if we didn't like it, we'd get right back on the train and go somewhere else. It was that easy. Yeah. And this was back when you would get off at a city, and right in this is something that would never go on today, but you would get off at a train station, and they would have a tourist information kiosk for the most part at all of them. And these people who worked there would get you a room. They would call around and they would say, okay, we've got a room for you at a pension or a hostel. And without even asking questions, we would just take a map and say, how do we get there? And then we would go and we'd drop our bags and we would go explore for the day. And we'd come back and we'd spend the night there, and then we'd get up and we'd go somewhere else. We'd get back on the train, go somewhere else. We would try to do very small trips, like, where we weren't on the train more than maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours. And that's how we did it. And we learned so much. Yeah.
How was it in terms of creating a new, I guess, vision of the world coming out of the US for the first time?
Wow. I mean, every day was an adventure. It was, back at that time, every country had a different currency. So obviously that was something you had to think about, was where are you going to get money and how are you going to pay for things in this particular country. And you learned a lot about people and dealing with people on their terms. And that's something obviously is a skill that any traveler needs to know, is that you're on somebody else's turf. And the earlier you learn a skill like that, the better. And I think that was the one thing that I really came away with, is that you kind of learn how to be nice to people, and because they wanted to be nice to you as well. I mean, I mentioned these kiosks and these tourist information places and people finding rooms for you and so forth. And I mean, they didn't have to do that. They could have said, well, welcome to Rome. You're on your own. Yeah. But we never found that. And you really got a sense that there was an awful lot of really good people in the world of all ages.
How do you think that first experience going overseas kind of changed you?
Well, I think it made me more trusting of people in general, which, as we get into my travel series, is something that I've had to do. So I think, getting back to my point that I just made, is that there's an awful lot of really good people in the world, and it's okay to let your guard down. I mean, obviously, you have to keep your wits about you a little bit when you travel, and not everybody's nice, and there are people out there who want to do you harm, and there are people who might want to scam you. But there's an awful lot of people who say, "I enjoy living here, and I want you to see the best of where I live," and that's what I came away with when I traveled.
So what happened when you got back to the US? What was the
oh yeah, then it was time. Then it was time to be an adult. So I went back. I did not have a job. I knew that I wanted to. Speaking of travel, I did not want to be based in Chicago. I did want to live somewhere else. I wanted to live somewhere warm. And I went back to Northwestern, and I went into the journalism school, and I saw a job posting on the bulletin board for a job at the Palm Beach Post in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I called, and I was hired over the phone. I had done an internship in upstate New York at a newspaper my junior year. Again, that was my definition of study abroad. I went to Binghamton, New York, right, in the middle of winter for 8 weeks and did an internship there. But as a result, I had journalism experience. I had a body of work, and they hired me over the phone, just basically based on that and the fact that I went to Northwestern. So I was home for about a month after getting back from Europe, and the next thing you know, I was driving my first car down to West Palm Beach, Florida, to start my career.
Wow. So a very different, I was going to say a very different world down in Florida compared to Illinois, of course. So
oh, yes.
How was the settling into life in Florida like?
Interesting. I didn't know anybody. I actually had a grandparent who lived about an hour, because everybody has a grandparent who lives in Florida. It's the law. But I didn't really want to hang out with my grandfather. So I really moved down there sight unseen and knowing nobody. And it was a very different environment, obviously. I mean, at first it was like, oh, it's really cool. I can play tennis outside in November and go swimming and that kind of thing. But Florida's got its challenges, as you find out very quickly, especially when you're a reporter, because when you're a journalist, you tend to see the worst side of everything. And it didn't take me long to realize there's a lot of really weird stuff in this state. and I'm looking at it from 4 feet away right now. So I liked my time in Florida, but really it took about a month for me to realize this is probably a good place to really exercise my journalism chops and get a lot of experience. But I knew it wasn't going to be my permanent home.
Now, you became an award-winning reporter while you were down in West Palm Beach.
Mm-hmm.
How does one become an award-winning journalist?
Yeah, one just submits stuff. One submits stuff to the awards committee. So I did. I won. I worked for the Palm Beach Post as a print journalist for 2.5 years. And that really was a great experience, because even though I wanted to be a television reporter, I'm so glad I started off as a print journalist, because you have more time to do things like cultivate sources and work on your stories and write, versus when you're a TV reporter, it's, we just got to get this. You got 90 seconds to tell a story. And that's not maybe the best way to inform people. But I was a print journalist, and then I made friends with a lot of the TV reporters. And I did that not just because I liked them, but I wanted to know if there were any job openings in the TV stations. I mean, I had ulterior motives, don't get me wrong. Right. And it worked because I did land a job at the NBC affiliate in West Palm Beach. And that's where I won my awards. I won awards for outstanding news and features reporting from UPI. And it's just it's a yearly contest, and you just submit what you think are your best pieces, and then they decide if they like you. And I'll tell you, before you ask, I will tell you, you're probably going to say, what did you submit? I can't remember what I submitted for news, but I can tell you that for features, I did a story. Now, West Palm Beach and Palm Beach are two very different places. Palm Beach is where Donald Trump lives and all the mansions and so forth. And West Palm Beach is not quite the same. But one of the big issues down when I was reporting as a broadcast journalist, this occurred in Palm Beach, was that they decided they were going to outlaw tennis ball machines.
Whoa.
Yeah, because that's a big issue in Palm Beach, because the neighbors didn't like the sounds that the private tennis ball machines made on the private courts.
Of course.
So yeah, I know that's some serious stuff. So I found the owner of a mansion that had a tennis court that had a tennis ball machine, and I said, "Would you mind if we came over and you just let me? I'm a tennis player." And would you mind if we came over and just shoot some video of me hitting on your ball machine? And he goes, "I don't want to be in the story, but absolutely, you can use my court." So, so that's what the story is based around. But it was me, and I never used to like to put myself in the stories. But I thought, hey, if it's a chance to hang out at a Palm Beach mansion on their private court, I'm in. And that's what won me the award.
Well, I was going to be wrong because I was going to submit my own suggestion of what you would have featured, and I was going to go for a hurricane story.
Yeah, I was down in Florida for 5 years, and we never ever had a hurricane. We had a few close calls. Yeah. And one thing I found out, though, especially when I was a TV reporter, TV weather people in Florida can't wait for a hurricane. They get absolutely giddy. They see a cloud formation over like St. Thomas, and they just start breathing heavily. And then they get on and talk about how serious and dangerous the storm is. And I just want to say to them, you have been prepping for this for months. Because they become the main person. They know it. They become the main guy. So they can't wait for hurricanes.
Their stocks go up overnight.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Now, you ended up quitting journalism. Why was that?
A couple of reasons. Now, I've always been a stand-up comedian. I started doing stand-up when I was 16 years old. And it was a hobby in Florida. It actually it's where I met a lot of my friends who I still stay in touch with to this day, was at comedy clubs. I didn't hang out with journalists. I hung out with comedians. So I was doing journalism during the day, and I was doing stand-up comedy at night. And the comedy boom really started to explode in the late 80s, and that's when comedy clubs just started to pop up everywhere. And a really good comedy club opened up about 5 minutes from my apartment called the Comedy Corner in West Palm Beach. And when I say really good, it was run by a gentleman who had very deep pockets. He was a big concert promoter, but he was also a big fan of comedy. But because he had deep pockets, he could get some of the best comics in the country to come and work this club. And for me, that was my school. I would go over and see Jerry Seinfeld and some of these Chris Rock and some of these guys who you just knew were destined for huge things. And I would be able to go see them, and a lot of times get to work with them. And anyway, the more I did stand-up, I was doing stand-up and really enjoying it, and I was becoming very disillusioned with journalism. And it was only because I just the stories that we were covering and the slant that we were taking at the TV station, I thought it was becoming a little bit sensationalized. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to tell those kinds of stories. And I at the end of the night, I would get off stage at a comedy club and I would think, what did I enjoy more today? Did I enjoy depressing people about some horrible thing that was going on in South Florida? And believe it, Mark, I saw an awful lot of very horrible things as a TV journalist in South Florida. Did I enjoy that more, or did I enjoy making people laugh? And the answer to me was obvious.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And then I started seeing guys at these comedy clubs who were making a living doing stand-up, and I thought, I think everybody who does stand-up full-time, they do it because eventually they say, I'm funnier than that guy. If that guy's making a living at it, I can do it too. Yeah. And I just decided if I was going to do it, I was still single. I didn't have any responsibilities really. And I thought, if I'm going to try this, I need to do it now. So that's when I quit.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, you're the first comedian I've had on my show, so you are setting a standard, so no pressure at all for you.
Oh, no, I can tell there's going to be no pressure coming up in this next question. Go
Well,
ahead.
I thought I'd have Joe Biden on next, so you won't have any worries there, yeah? So where did the comedy thing come from within your life? Was there a role model or epiphany, or what happened there?
There were two comedians that I would say, they say who were your influences. One was David Letterman. I used to enjoy watching David Letterman when he used to guest host Johnny Carson. He used to guest host every Monday night at one point, and I never used to watch Carson, but I used to stay up to watch Letterman. There was just something about this guy that I really could relate to, and maybe it's the fact that we were both from the Midwest. I just enjoyed his style and listening to him. I enjoyed his self-deprecating type of humor, and the other one was Steve Martin. Steve Martin was the first real comedy album that I bought where I recited the whole thing, and did his bits in front of my friends. I would say those two are really the two who convinced me to go into comedy.
Are you born funny, or is it something you can train yourself for?
I think you're born funny. I have spoken in front of high school classes. Sometimes I'm one of those guys that when they do the people with unique profession unit, somehow I always get picked. I don't think you can take an unfunny person and make them funny. I think you can help people, but it's funny because I see comedy classes being offered. Like in every big city, there's always stand-up comedy classes. And I always tell people, be careful, because I think that implies people who sign up for those, I think that they go into it with the expectations that I'm going to come out a very funny person. Yeah. And I don't think that's possible. I just don't. I think you can be more comfortable on stage. That's why when I've been asked sometimes to write jokes for a CEO to deliver, and what I want to say is I'll write you some material, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fly, because you're the one delivering it. And if you're not funny and you don't know if you don't know anything about timing or things like that, it doesn't matter how funny the joke is.
Yeah. So once you decided that you wanted to be a comedian, what's the pathway? Where do you start with it all?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there is no real pathway. The way I started, I mentioned earlier that there were clubs just popping up all over the country. And that's what made it easy for me, is I knew that when I started doing stand-up, that I could work every week. I might be working in some horrible places, but I could find a comedy club to work in every week of the year. And that was, and I did work in some pretty awful places. You talk about travel. I mean, I went everywhere from Slidell, Louisiana to Destin, Florida to places in Tennessee. Bristol, Tennessee was the very first place that I ever performed when I made the jump to full-time comedian. My first job as a full-time comedian was in Bristol, Tennessee. And, they were restaurants, and they weren't all comedy clubs. They were just bars and nightclubs and any place with a stage and a microphone. But if there was money in it, I mean, I had to make a living. So you networked with other comedians, and they told you about rooms and who was booking the room, and you made phone calls, and you say, such and such told me you have a great club, and can I come work it? And if they said yes, and that's what I did. And that's really what everybody was doing at that time. There's no, I mean, people say, oh, well, did you get an agent right away? No, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've only had an agent for about 5, and I don't have an agent now. So people think that that's what you do, that you, you write material, that you dial Netflix on the phone and you get a special, and the rest is history. And there really is, and people say, is there a circuit? Did you work the circuit? There's no circuit either. There's no such thing. There might have been in the 1950s, but there's no comedy circuit. You go where you can find a stage.
Do you remember your first, let's say, major gig in a club?
Yeah. I mean, I think my first major gig was that Comedy Corner when I was in West Palm because again, I wasn't a full-time comedian, but I would being able to work with some of the really big comics for where you knew 300 people would be coming in every night.
Yeah.
I would say that was my first one.
So how was it? Like, how was that kind of experience of breaking out of your shell and having that opportunity?
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing just knowing you could do it. I mean, and I remember the first time somebody said to me, "Can you do 30 minutes? Can you do a half hour?" And that seemed to me like there's no way I could talk for 30 minutes. And I remember getting off stage and doing 30 minutes, and it went well, and thinking, "Wow, I just did that. I've never done that much time before." And yet somehow it worked. So, because up until then I'd been doing sets of 10 to 12 minutes or something like that. And sometimes that could seem like an eternity.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think, I can't remember the first time I actually got off stage and to use a comedian's term, killed. I don't think I could pinpoint one. It's sort of a gradual process, but I think when you're a comedian, it's how often can you get that feeling? You know, the more good shows you have than the bad shows you have, that is what really I think is when you say, I'm good at this.
Any superstitions before you go on stage?
I don't have any. No,
No?
the comedy's tough enough without that kind of stuff to deal with.
You don't down a gallon of high-powered energy drink or anything?
No,
like that?
I don't. It's funny because I go in spurts with the caffeine. I used to like to drink just a cup of regular coffee right before I went on because I thought it makes me think a little bit quicker, or maybe work the crowd a little bit easier, be a little quicker on my feet. But I've never wanted to feel like I had to rely on anything to do stand-up.
Okay. Now, I was really excited to talk to you today for many different reasons, and one of them was your connection to the corporate world, because you decided that there was an opportunity within the corporate sector to take your comedy. Can you tell us how that came about and what it was?
Yeah, you know, I was really starting to do a lot of clubs in about the mid 90s. That's when I quit my job in 1989, so I had been, you know, doing stand-up for several years. And about 1992, 1993, I was still doing clubs, but I wasn't making a whole lot of money. And I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere doing clubs. And I still liked doing clubs, and I knew I had to do them. But I hooked up with a company in Chicago that an actor friend of mine told me about. The company's name, and they're still around, their name was Live Marketing. And Live Marketing was a company that produced live trade show presentations on trade show floors. They would write little sketches about the company and the product. And some of them would be very straight and boring, and some of them would be somewhat entertaining. And he told me, he said he was an actor and he was doing these presentations to earn some extra money. And he said, you should check these guys out. And I did. And I remember what I went into them, what I said was, I said, do you ever hire comedians to do presentations? And they said, no. And I said, do you ever write? Do you ever perform funny presentations? And they said, yes, we do. And I said, I would like to write some for you. I had no technical background, but I had a journalism background. And they said, sure. So I started writing for big companies like Cisco and Intel and so forth. And then I was hired to be the spokesperson to actually deliver the lines that I was writing. And I started hanging out, obviously, on trade show floors and talking with some of these corporate people. And I thought to myself, there's comedy in here. There's stand-up in here. And I started taking some of the stuff that I learned on trade show floors and started talking about it in my nightclub act. And at this time, everybody was learning how to run a computer. Computers had just been thrust on everybody. And Bill Gates was the bomb. He was the god. Everybody was using Microsoft, and everybody was frustrated with computers. And I was doing this kind of stuff on stage, and it was really resonating with the comedy club audience. And people were starting to hire me. They would say, you know, you should do those bits at our company retreat or our company golf outing or so forth. And I started doing that. And then word got out that I was doing this, and a couple of people who booked events for big corporate events started hearing about what I was doing. And they started hiring me and really taking a chance on me. So before you know it, I was performing at these big offsite meetings for companies like Hewlett-Packard and Verizon and so forth like that, and just making them laugh. And the more I did it, the more I thought, I am really enjoying this. I am enjoying, I feel like I know how to talk to these people. I know how to push their buttons a little bit and make them laugh about what they're doing. And I was enjoying a lot more than clubs. I didn't have to work at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. I didn't have to be in my car traveling to places like Bristol, Tennessee, and not knowing who I was going to be working with or where I was going to be, what kind of accommodations they were putting me up in. And little by little, I just decided this is the venue for me. And I stopped doing clubs.
As an ex-corporate guy, I'm sitting here thinking, well, there's probably no other place in the world where there's such a dour sense of humor than in the corporate world. So was it difficult to open doors, or were they quite hungry and had an appetite for this stuff?
They did have an appetite for it because it was something that they'd never seen before,
right,
or very rarely. And if you could make them laugh about what they did, whether what they were selling, what they were developing, what they were creating, and do it in a way that it wasn't mean-spirited. That's the thing. That's the very tricky part about doing corporate comedy, is being able to make people laugh without making it seem like you're belittling them or mocking them. Because and a lot of comedians don't know how to do that. And then they come off stage, and the audience can turn on you in a heartbeat. And they come off stage and they think, well, that was a bad audience. Well, no, they were a great audience. You messed it up. You took it one step too far. And I've always thought I was pretty good at knowing how to just kind of dip your toe in the water without diving in.
It's funny you say that. I remember back to my years in the corporate world, and we had a keynote speaker come in one day for a conference, and he was a world famous author. And he thought he was a bit of a funny guy, and he came in and he absolutely bombed it. And he was basically ridiculed by the end of his act, really, because he was just terrible, because he did exactly what you just said. He belittled the company, he belittled the employees, and it was a shocker. So I can relate to what you just said. How's it evolved since you started? Like how's the whole? Are there many comedians out there doing this within the corporate world?
No, there's surprisingly few, which is great for me.
Yeah.
I'm shocked there's not more, but I think part of the reason there's not is that, as I just kind of explained, is there's rules. When you go to a comedy club, there's really no rules. A comedian can pretty much say whatever he or she wants. It's their stage, it's their microphone, it's their time. When you do corporate, you're basically an employee. They hired you specifically, and I think a lot of comedians just don't want to abide by those rules, or they say they can't, but they really can't. That means no profanity. That means not, like I said, not belittling what they do or their product. That means there's a set of parameters that you have to abide by. And I've always been willing to do that. I have never felt like that compromised my act. I've always had a very clean act. I've never been a nasty comedian. I don't like to. I mean, I'll have some fun with people, hey, what do you do for the company? That kind of thing. What exactly is that? Oh, you're the chief, you're the senior scrum master. Okay, so were you the junior scrum master and then you got a promotion? That kind of stuff. I'm okay doing things like that, but nothing where I don't want people to leave. They're seeing a comedian. They're supposed to be laughing. I don't want them to leave feeling bad. That's not my job. And,
so do you poke fun at the senior executives of the companies?
Sometimes I kind of feel them out. it sort of depends on how much I feel like they're enjoying the show. I don't. Here's why I typically don't. And sometimes I'm asked to do that. Sometimes they say, well, you know, the head of sales is a really lousy golfer, or he drinks too much, or he does this, and maybe you can work that into your show. And I always say, you know, I don't know this guy, and the audience knows I don't know this guy. So for me to just come out with that, I don't think it rings true. I go, you should be doing that. You know, you should have your roast, and those are the kind of things that you should be doing. But I think it looks a little phony when somebody who is not part of the company says those kind of things. I think it looks very scripted and very staged and very forced. Now, again, I am more than happy to riff with people in the audience. I really enjoy doing that. And if it's the CEO, and you know, I did a show for one of my first shows was for Hewlett Packard, and I remember I could tell that their senior people had all the best seats in the house. I could tell they were sitting right. You know, there was like 700 people in this ballroom, and I could tell that they were all sitting up front. And I just said, so what do you do for the company? What do you do for the company? It was very obvious, you know, I'm the VP of sales. I'm the VP of this. And I go, oh, you know, that's really nice, you know. So, you know, you sponsor the event. Why not sit yourselves right up front? And then people laughed. And I said, oh, you know, but what about our partners, our customers, the people who you know, who earn our salaries? And I say, oh, you know, we fed them chicken and fish. Sit them in the back. I'm comfortable up here. So, and they loved it. They loved it. That's not mean-spirited. And the audience loved it, too. Everybody who was sitting in the back loved it. That's the kind of stuff where I say you can have fun without taking it too far.
It's very much horses for courses, yeah?
Yeah, and I also think that senior executives of companies, they want to seem normal. They want to feel like they have a sense of humor. I have had some of my best experiences just kind of interviewing some of the top dogs in the companies, because I think they want the people who work for them to feel like they're a normal person.
And I tell you what, you probably get to see those people in a completely different light than what most other people do. Because,
absolutely,
you know, they're working within a very strict structure every single day.
Yes.
Very serious businesses,
yeah,
you know, multi-million, billion-dollar businesses. And here you are coming in to bring some laughter and goodwill to the place.
Yeah, and I think they want that. I'll give you a quick story of the CEO of Motorola, a guy named Greg Brown. I was doing a show for Motorola, and I had to interview him on stage. And Motorola had a tough year, and I was on the phone, not with him, but with some of the people who worked right under him. And they said, okay, here's what you have to ask him. You have to ask him about this and the problems we're having getting our products to market, and you know Amazon's intrusion into what we do. And you know, I go, okay, and I'm writing all this down, and I go, and the show was happening in mid-March, and I go, this is great. I'll be happy to ask him all those questions. I go, can I ask him a question that has nothing to do with Motorola? And there was this pause, and they said, like, what? I said, can I ask him who his Final Four picks are for the NCAA basketball tournament? And there was this lengthy pause. I knew they were all looking at each other around the conference table. And the one guy finally comes out and he goes, I think he'd like that. And I go, great. I go, do not tell him that I'm going to be doing this. And so we did the interview, and I asked him all the serious questions. And then right in the middle, and by the way, it was out in Vegas, perfect place. It was during, and I said, and I said, by the way, I go, who you like in the Final Four? And he kind of looked at me and he's like, oh, an easy question. And he says, well, I got to go with Kentucky. And of course, everybody who was from Kentucky in the audience was like, woohoo! You know, and he goes, and my dark horse is this. And you could just sense the mood in the room lightening up. It's like all of a sudden he's one of us. We're talking sports. And people came up to him afterwards, and they go, I can't believe you picked Kentucky, you know. And he loved it. And he said to me afterwards, he goes, great question. So that was a really fun moment.
How long have you been doing the corporate stuff for?
Probably 20 years.
20 years, wow.
Yeah, I think so. I pretty much about 2002, 2003 is when I shifted over.
So how have you seen, you know, take away current situation, how have you seen corporates change over those years?
I think, I think people still want to laugh. I don't think that'll ever go away. I don't think it will ever, even though I've had companies say, this is not a good time for us to be laughing. That always bugs me when companies say that, or we're not a funny company. I don't think that's up to you to decide that. And I don't think it's up to you to say this is not a good time for us to be laughing. It's always a good time to be laughing. When do you not want to be laughing? I do think that the corporate world, the corporate culture has gotten very thin-skinned. I think there's a lot more, is it okay if we hire a comedian? What if he offends somebody? What if he does this? What if he says this? HR has gotten more involved. The human resource department, God bless them, they're definitely needed, but sometimes just like you want to say, stay in your lane. It's going to be okay. Yeah. And I think that's something that I've had to deal with. I've had to try and outguess audiences as far as what is and isn't appropriate. Like I said, I've never considered myself. I know that I'm not an offensive comedian. I know that. But my definition of offensive and your definition of offensive and HR's definition of offensive might be three different things. Yeah. And I can't figure that out. There is no playbook for me to say that, for me to know what they think is appropriate. So that's why it's gotten a little bit more difficult. But the more difficult it gets, I've seen the more appreciative audiences are. When you can still stay within those parameters like we talked about and deliver the goods. Because I think that the corporate world is becoming less funny every year. So when I have people come up to me afterwards and go, that is exactly what we needed, it is so gratifying.
Yep. Maybe it's time to change the label away from calling yourself a comedian and becoming a medicating consultant.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I don't call I never called myself that. I don't call myself a comedian. I call myself a business humorist. I mean, if they want to call me a comedian, if they say, we have a corporate comedian, that's fine. But I do think that the word comedian now, it can have a negative connotation in the business world. I think you think of that guy who's, comes out at midnight with the beer in his hand and starts, unleashing a stream of profanities and racist and ethnic, those kind of jokes and so forth. That is exactly what corporate America does not want.
Yeah. So, and they probably see it as a bit of a jackass as well, right? In terms
probably,
of, you could go off on any angle whatsoever and get into big trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So how does being a comedian impact your self-confidence? Have you always been somebody that's been extroverted and out there and confident, or?
Well, the funny thing is I consider myself somewhat of an introvert. I think a lot of comedians do, because we spend a lot of time alone. I mean, people think, it's weird. People always say, being a comedian, that's got to be so difficult to be up on stage and make people laugh. And I always say, you know what? The 45 minutes to an hour that I'm on stage, as weird as this sounds, that's the easy part. It's the rest of the time. It's what do you do with the rest of the time? And a lot of comedians don't know what to do with the rest of their time. But we spend a lot of time, where we get on stage and everybody laughs at us and we get this adoration from the audience, but then we go back to our room by ourselves and we are there pretty much alone until the next time we're on stage. So I'm an extrovert in the fact that I enjoy talking to people. I'm fascinated with people. You fascinate me. You live on a boat. You're bobbing up and down on the coast of Australia right now. I think that's really cool. Doing a podcast. I mean, that interests me. I think everybody has a story to tell, and that's probably where some of my journalism background comes. I mean, it was to try and get people to talk and get people to talk about themselves. But I think I think if you said, are you an extrovert or an introvert, I would say I'm an introvert.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, you did a bit of name dropping, and I must say serious name dropping earlier in the show when you were back in Florida starting off in your comic journey, but you've shared stages with people like Celine, Dion, Leno, and Julio Iglesias and all these people. How was that experience?
It's different for everyone. I mean, I'm sort of I'm a celebrity groupie. I mean, I just could sit and stare at celebrities and just say what makes them tick. You know, I don't even have to talk to them. Every celebrity whose concert I've opened for and so forth, they all have a different way of preparation. Some are out and about talking to people, and there is like Celine Dion. People say, "Oh, what was it like to? What was Celine Dion like?" I don't know. I never ever saw her. I never met her. She was holed up in her warm up room doing vocals and so forth, and you know, I was her opening act, and I think they said to me, "You do 20 minutes." And I'm sure at about 19 minutes into my act, they probably knocked on her door and said, "You ready?" And that was it. Yeah. And yet there are others who I've worked for that are out and about and talking to the crew and, "Hey, Greg, thanking me for being their opening act," type of thing. And those are always very pleasurable to see that big name stars are normal people.
So are there any of those big name stars that you'd say are, really down to earth and cite some of those that have come up to you and had some interaction?
Oh, yeah. Keith Urban. Mm-hmm. I worked with Keith Urban in Paris, France at a private event of all places. Mm-hmm. And he did a meet and greet, and he probably had to meet about 50 people. And this was about an hour before the show, and I was one of them. And I just said, "Hey, Keith, I'm Greg Schwem, and I'm going to be, warming up the crowd for you." He's like, "All right, great." And then about an hour later, I'm ready to go on, and he's backstage. He goes, "Hey, Greg, how's it going?" And the fact that he remembered my name, I thought was amazing. That was amazing. Yeah. It's that Australian thing, You remembered my name too, Mark. What is it about you Aussies? You're good with names. Let's see what some of the other people. I remember I opened for the musical group Alabama years ago in a theater, and the funniest thing is I came off stage, and the lead guitar player, I can't remember his name, short guy, had watched my whole set, and he was obviously a very big fan of comedy. And he just could not wait to tell me the most disgusting joke I'd ever heard. He just couldn't wait. He was cackling as he's like, "Okay, here comes the comedian. Now I can tell this joke," Yeah.
Isn't it funny where you have a joke and all you want to do is have it validated by a comedian?
Yes, exactly. That's so true. So, that was very funny. I'm like, "Don't you have a show to do?" I would play the same songs every night, I've never seen you before, though.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, listen, thanks for sharing about the corporate journey there. That was really interesting. But I want to get on and talk about another thing that you've been doing, which is really interesting, called A Comedian Crashes Your Pad. Now, right. We get into the travel side of things now, so you can tell us about where did that whole idea come from and what is it?
Well, that's the extrovert in me a little bit. The Comedian Crashes Your Pad came about. I became fascinated with the home sharing market. The Airbnb, the VRBO, the people who would just open up their places to strangers. And I thought to myself, there's stories in here. I've always wanted, Mark, to I've never left my journalism roots. I've always missed journalism. Maybe not enough to go back into it full time, but I always missed the Q&A process of putting a camera on somebody and asking them questions and just letting them talk.
Yeah.
And I thought people who open up their homes to strangers have to be really interesting people. So I decided, as long as I was on the road and I was doing in different towns and I was doing these corporate gigs, if I had a moment, maybe I could take an extra day and find a home share property to stay in that was either an interesting property or an interesting host that had the property and stay there and interview them. And the home sharing market was booming, had just really taken off. This was really becoming a way to travel, was not to stay in hotels. And I love hotels, don't get me wrong. But after a while, most hotels are, they kind of have a sameness to them. And I thought there's a lot of stories out here, and maybe I could turn this into something. or at least have some fun and meet some interesting people. So, and my kids were getting older, so it wasn't as necessary for me to come rushing home after doing shows so I could, coach Little League or something like that. So I thought, well, I'll take an extra day and I'll find some places and I'll stay there. And I did. Okay, I'm doing a show in Miami. Let's get on the home sharing sites and let's see if we can find somebody interesting in Miami to stay with. Or I'm doing a show in Boise, Idaho. Let's see what we can find. And so I would stay with these people, and I said to them, the only prerequisites for me stay, I paid for them myself. I didn't ask for them to let me stay for free. I wasn't one of these influencers who said, hey, if you let me stay at your 5-star resort for 10 days and bring my family and my pets, you might get a couple.
I'll write a 2-paragraph blog.
Right,
about it.
yeah, and you might get a lot of likes. So I said the only requirements is you have to consent to an on-camera tour of your property and a sit-down interview. And then I said, anything else you want to do, that's fair game. If you want to do nothing, that's okay. But if you want to hang out, that's fine too. I'm up for anything. So I started shooting these and little 4-minute segments. I always thought, my goal was kind of always to, and still kind of is, to get it like on a Sunday morning news magazine show. And I thought, if this turns into a TV series or somebody's interested in it, great. If not, it looks good on my website. It's something else to talk about, and I'm having a hell of a lot of fun doing it. Yeah. And I've probably done about 35 different episodes in 35 different cities in 3 foreign countries.
Well, brilliant. So how do you suss out who and what's interesting? Are you looking for people living in like tiny houses or stuff like that?
It's funny. I look at their profiles. I look at, did they name the property something fun? I vet them. I want a very creative profile. Yes, I'm looking for quirky places. I'm not necessarily looking for the most lavish or most expensive. I don't have to go stay in a mansion every time that I go somewhere. But I have researched to see what types of properties people will stay in, whether it's a yurt or a tree house or like you said, a tiny house. I've stayed on a yacht. But I'm more interested in, do you have a story to tell me? Do you have something that'll really sound good on camera? Are you a vegan? I stayed with a couple in Fargo, and they gave half of their home share proceedings to a charity, like an African charity. They were really connected to. Those are the kind of, his place was nothing, but his story was great.
Do you tell people you're a comedian?
I do, because I do. I mean, the segment is called "A Comedian Crashes Your Pad," and that my profile on all these home sharing sites. That's the first thing I say. I said I am a comedian, and I think that also attracts people too. Like, like you said, you've never had a comedian on your show. Most people have never had a comedian stay with them either.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I think they think it's going to be an adventure for them.
So you said you've already been on a yacht before.
I have. A 70-foot yacht. Now, I was told that if I was on a 75-foot yacht, that was called a super yacht. So I was just under super yacht status. Okay. That was in Fort Lauderdale, and it was a married gay couple, and they had parked this yacht on the Intercoastal, and I stayed with them for a night, and we had a great talk. I will talk with people about issues. Sometimes we talked a little bit about gay marriage in that episode, and again, it's I'm not sure what drew me to them: the fact that they were a married gay couple, or the fact that they had a yacht that was their home. Maybe a little bit of both, but it was a very enjoyable experience.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've got a mini super yacht too.
Okay.
And I'm going to invite you to come and visit me next time you're in
yes.
Australia. But
yes.
Have you been to Australia?
Well, I've been to the airport. I know this is horrible. I've been to the Sydney airport. I am what they call, or before obviously COVID-19, but there were several years where I was called what they call a mileage chaser, where I'd had to get to that 100,000 miles so I could get exec platinum status on American. So, on exec platinum on American, that means not only do you get to board first, but you get to elbow people out of the way.
Wow.
On your way. Yeah, that's like written in the contract. You can literally shove people aside. So
Wow.
you can shove the platinum members out of the way.
That's a great policy American Airlines have.
Indeed. Yeah, they don't know it, but yeah. So anyway, I really wanted, but I had the funny thing. Well, it's not really funny, but I knew it was getting to be December, and I was about 20,000 miles short, and I had to make exec because my dad was sick, and I knew that the following year there might be a situation where I would have to jump on a plane at a moment's notice. And you can do that when you have very high status. They'll find a seat for you. So my wife said to me, she says, I can get you to Australia. You can fly to Australia and turn around and fly home, and that'll do it. That'll be your 20,000 miles.
Seriously, you flew from Chicago to Sydney and straight back again.
To Sydney, and I stayed in the Sydney airport. I couldn't leave because I think if you leave the airport, there's like paperwork involved. I had to get some status or something that I just didn't want to deal with. So I went to the Sydney airport, and of course, it was your summertime in December. It was absolutely gorgeous weather. I left an ice storm. Left an ice storm and flew to your beautiful country with amazing weather. And I was in the airport lounge for about 4 hours, and I turned around and I got on a plane. And I'm not kidding, Mark. When I got on the plane to go home, I about cried when I got on the plane. Like, this was awful. So I vowed I will never do that again. Oh, and here's the worst part. So after all that flying, I land in Chicago, and there's a text from my wife, and she goes, I miscalculated. She goes, you're still 400 miles short. She goes, however, she did all this while I was in the air. She goes, I just booked you on a flight to Nashville that leaves in like 2 hours. You fly to Nashville, turn around, and I did it.
After
and I made
you've been
it.
to Australia.
Yeah, after Australia, I went to Nashville, turned around, flew back home. Yeah, these one thing you find out is like these airlines, they don't round up the mileage. Like if you're at 99,900 and you need 100,000 miles, they don't say, "Oh, we'll just give it to you."
I bet they don't know. No.
Yeah.
Wow, your wife's a gem. She's beautiful.
She's not good with math, but she is a gem.
She's got your back. She'll put you on another plane straight to Nashville.
That's right. So I made it, and but that was my only experience with Australia, and I'm super bummed.
Well, I'll tell you what, I know there's going to be a lot of my regular listeners saying right now, it's time for me to tell you I'm actually a New Zealander, and I'm actually just transiting this country called Australia, but you're still welcome here anyway.
Oh my gosh, I would love to come. It's definitely on the bucket list.
Very good. Now, the funny thing is, you've been a journalist, you've been a comedian, but I also have found out that you're an aspiring rapper.
Oh wow. We have to go back a long way for that. You saw the Funny Dad Inc. website, right?
I did see the Funny Dad Inc. website, yes.
I did. When my kids were a little younger, I was writing a lot of, I write a humor column for the Chicago Tribune Syndicate, and I found myself writing a lot about my kids, and I was writing so much about them that I thought, well, maybe I should just create a separate website just for this kind of stuff, just devoted to funny columns and videos about my kids. So I created FunnyDadInc.com. The ink was for the whole, since I'm a business comedian, well, okay, that should be that. So FunnyDadInc.com. And I thought, well, what can I put on the website that would really grab people? And so I decided to make a rap song called the Clean Your Room Rap. And I shot it one snowy February afternoon in my daughter's room. She went to school. I said, don't clean it. Leave it. Leave it out, but I go, it's going to be up on YouTube by the end of the day.
Fantastic. So, well, for the sake of my audience today, I am going to put a link to that particular video because...
please do.
It was terribly brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
It was terribly brilliant. Now, the
But
other
you
thing,
can tell people who watch it, they know it's dated because there's a line in the song where I say, make your dad a believer, make this room so clean it's like Justin Bieber. And at the time, Justin Bieber was a clean-cut kid. Not so much now. So yeah. So I just I want people to know I know who Justin Bieber is and I know what he's become. But at the time that I shot that, he was like 13-year-old teeny bopper Justin Bieber.
well, I'll tell you what, it inspired me to clean up my boat the other day as well.
Oh,
so
good.
It's looking sprick and span today. I tell
Good. You know, I stayed on a boat in London. One of my segments was on the London canal in London, and this guy did not clean his boat at all. So
yeah.
I mean, I literally I looked at it like, you're charging people for this, and he wasn't even there. He was in Thailand. Right. You know, he had some captain that he hired and so forth. But I was just thinking, wow, okay. As soon as I find the bed, I'm going to bed.
Back to something serious for a minute.
Yes.
And that is we're living in a new time right now, and
We are.
It's affected a lot of people, not in a good way, and everybody is dealing with it in their own way, which is respectful for that. And we've got to understand that a lot of people have lost their jobs. How has this process affecting you and what you do with your career right now?
Well, obviously the travel industry is on hold right now, and with it being on hold, my careers as both a comedian and as a TV host that hosts a travel series, that's on hold too. Obviously, I can't go out and shoot pads to crash, and obviously I can't get to business. There's no conventions and conferences where I do my stand-up going on right now. I know it's going to come back. I don't think it's going to come back right away, but I do think it will. And I'm doing what a lot of entertainers are doing. I'm doing virtual shows for companies, and that's different. It's different to be doing stand-up comedy in your office, but I know that it's something that people want. People want to laugh. They want to laugh now more than ever. Yeah. People turn to humor, Mark, in difficult times. And I've seen that after 9/11. I saw that after the market crash of 2008, 2009, when everybody was losing their jobs and companies were downsizing 30, 40, 50%. People turn to humor during those times. And I wake up every morning and I tell myself that. And I know that when we come out of this, I think humor is going to be, I think what we talked about earlier about how people are getting very thin-skinned in the corporate world, I think that's going to go away. I think people are going to be less inclined. I think they're going to be more inclined to say, we just need somebody to make us laugh, to make us feel better. And let's not worry so much about what he may or may not say that might offend one person out of the 1,500 people that are watching this or that are in this audience. So I'm riding out the storm like everybody else and hoping for the best. I know that travel is going to be very different when it comes back, but I still know that people are going to want to get out. They're going to want to go places.
I guess looking at a positive light in it all too, this current process we're going through, I'm sure it's giving you lots of new material that you can put together as well.
Yeah, it is. And, the funny thing is COVID-19 is not funny. People dying of a virus that there is no cure for is not funny in any sense. And I don't want people who are listening to this to think I'm making fun of that, because I'm not. I would never do that. However, being quarantined for 10 weeks, I'm sorry, that's funny. Having to do Zoom calls, having to be with your family. There is a gold mine of humor in that. And that's what I want people. I always say that you can find humor in any situation.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people are going to want to laugh about this when we are back together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing to say. A couple of philosophical things before we wind up today. What have all your travel experiences combined? And I want to take out that trip to Sydney because I just think that's ridiculous. But what have all your other, let's say, other travel experiences over the years, what have they embraced and embellished into you as a human being? What have they given you over your years?
You know what? They've given me, number one, and this is kind of playing on what we talked about when I went to Europe as a college student, trust in people, that there are very good people all over the world. I think we live, and I think we live in a society now where, we all hide behind walls and we have guns at our bedsides and we have home security systems and so forth. And we look at people very warily. And yet at the same time, we have home sharing sites like an Airbnb or so forth that are huge companies, because people are willing to live with strangers and to go and to talk with them and so forth. So there's never been anywhere that I've been that I haven't felt comfortable. There have been moments when I've been lost or confused or something like that. But I feel like if you need help, someone will reach out and help you no matter where you are.
Has there been one particular trip that's been the most impactful for you in your life journey so far?
In my life, let's see. Wow, that's a tough one. No, I can't think of one. I can think of I can think of an audience. I can think of a show that I did that has probably made more of an impact on me than any show. And that was I actually did I did a show 2 years ago for the CIA. At CIA headquarters,
right?
And
but no one knew it was on, right?
No one knew. Well, it was a surreal experience. You're not allowed to use your phones. You're not. There's no cell phones. Which sounds really weird for a covert intelligence agency, that they can't have their phones with them.
Was Edward Snowden there?
Edward Snowden was not, nor did I bring his name up. But it was the most rapt, because they didn't have their phones. It was the most attentive audience that I've had in quite some time. But they loved it. And I thought, you know what? If a group like this, knowing what these people know and knowing what they do for a living every day, if they can laugh at themselves, then anybody can laugh at themselves.
That's fantastic. There's not many people in the world that could say they've done a comic show to the CIA.
Yeah, including everybody at the CIA before I showed up. I mean, they said, we've never had anybody like you before. Oh, really? Shocking. So they had a guy that stood by me the whole time. That was like they had an escort with me.
Yeah.
And this was a morning show. It was like 10 in the morning. And he says, he picked me up at 9 a.m. I got there, and he said,
did they drive you around blindfolded so you didn't
know? No, not really. Yeah. Take one of these, Mr. Schwem.
Yeah. You'll wake up in some bunker
everybody
under the
does.
ground somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, so he says, there's a part of the headquarters, there's like a museum. And he says, I can show you some of the very fascinating stuff. And he says, is there anything else you'd like to see? And I said, well, no. I said, I go, we're about an hour before showtime. I go, this is kind of when I get in my pre-game. So I kind of need, there's the introvert in me coming out. I said, I just kind of, I want to study my notes. So I go, if you can I'll just sit like in the lounge or so forth. And you just come and get me like 10 minutes before showtime. And he looks at me for a minute, and I said to him, I go, you have to stay with me, don't you? And he goes, I do. So it wasn't like he was 2 feet away, but I was basically, he was in charge of me, and he really couldn't let me out of his sight. So I figured out right away, this was not your normal show.
Wow.
Yeah.
At least you weren't in a bunker under the Mojave Desert or something.
That is true. Just pop up and do comedy. Yeah.
Now, I've got a couple of reluctant questions. I told a friend of mine that I was going to have a chat to you today, and he said, I've got to ask him this. And I said, no, it's so cliche doing this to a comedian, but I'm going to ask anyway. He wants to know, who's your favorite male comedian these days?
These days, John Mulaney.
John Mulaney.
John Mulaney, a Chicago guy, probably mid-30s, and I watch his stand-up, and I think there's hope for this profession.
Right.
I do. I mean, I think him as a writer and as a storyteller, and I tell everybody, if you've never heard of him, and a lot of people have not,
No.
if you get Netflix, go watch Kid Gorgeous, which was filmed at Radio City Music Hall. I think it's one of the finest hours of stand-up that I've seen in a long time. So he's my current favorite.
And what about your favorite female comedian? Do you have one?
You know, I don't really. I have several who I can watch for a few minutes, but Maria Bamford intrigues me. She's very dark, but I've always liked her delivery and so forth. When she was doing stand-up, one of my favorites was Ellen DeGeneres. I thought Ellen DeGeneres is a great stand-up. People don't know her as a stand-up; they know her as a talk show host. Yeah. But I always liked her style. I liked her delivery. I would say she was one of my favorites when she was working her craft.
Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting. Greg, we're going to wind up now, and I'd just would like to give you the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of humanity to all my listeners across the world today, to give a little bit of positive ray of sunshine.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I said people turn to humor in the darkest of times, and that is needed. We are in a very dark time right now. I think we know we're going to come out of it. I know we're going to come out of it to a different world, but humor will never go away. The ability to laugh will never go away, and it's why I can't stand it when I hear companies saying to me that this is not a good time for us to be laughing. I've said this in my virtual show that you have to find something to laugh at every day. And if that means you go on YouTube and you find a clip from your favorite movie where you know all the lines and you can recite them, but it still makes you laugh, if that's what you need to get through your day, then why not spend a few moments just taking a look at that clip? Just, you know, that's what keeps me going every day, is just knowing that I'm going to be able to bring a little bit of goodwill into people's lives. I think that's the most gratifying thing about doing stand-up comedy, and that's why I continue to do it.
Fantastic. Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Global Travel Channel podcast show today. I would like to thank you for your dedication to your family today as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving me your time to be on our show.
This thing went by. We've been talking for an hour and 25 minutes, and it seems like we've only been talking for 15, and that's a credit to you, Mark. I mean, you kept the conversation going. Do you talk to all your guests this long?
No, I don't actually. So
really? Wow, that's an honor.
And I've still got about 50 questions I didn't ask you, so you'll have to come back again.
I know. This time we can do it on the yacht. All right.
That is a great idea.
We can forget this remote virtual crap. We're gonna do one-on-one on the yacht. You have a cooler full of beer,
and I certainly will have. And I'll tell you what, I'll teach you how to get out of Australian airports.
As long as there's no paperwork involved, that's fine. If I just had been able to take a taxi to the other side of the airport, I would have been happy. Like to the different terminal, just anything to get outside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right.
Thanks again, Greg.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
There we are, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my guest today, Mr. Greg Schwem from Chicago, Illinois. Fantastic to have you on the show, Greg, and thanks for sharing with us about the pathway to passion, because leaving a job in journalism and taking on something of the unknown, and even though you are totally committed to it, it's always a risk. And for those that are sitting out there today listening about potentially changing your lives, there's another guest that's been on my show that's done just that. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you are looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel podcast, then all you need to do is go to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find all of the previous episodes there, and there's a ton of amazing people that you can listen to and all their travel adventures around the world. If you do like our content, please tell someone about it. Share it with a friend, a family member, or even a work colleague, even if they're on the other side of the world. And we're all able to do that remotely these days, aren't we? And if you feel so, you can vote for Greg today on the Global Travel Channel Podcast Awards. Yes, just go onto our website under the awards page and you can quickly vote for Greg if you enjoyed him being a guest today. Okay, folks, well, that's it for me for this round of the Global Travel Channel Podcast Show. I've loved bringing this show to you, and I look forward to being back real soon with another one. My name's Mark Philpott. Until then, stay healthy and safe.